September 27th, 2000. 36 kilometers off the Gaza coast. Coordinates: 31.5 de Groningen, 34.2 Woodgrer E. British gas engineers turn a valve. The pressure gauge spikes. They've just confirmed it. 1.4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Street value at today's prices, $500 billion, sitting right there under Palestinian water. Yasser Arafat calls it a gift from God. 3 weeks later, the Second Intifada begins. 24 years later, that gas still sits there, untouched, unextracted. Does that sound like coincidence to you? By the end of this video, when you look at a map, you won't see countries anymore. You'll see pipelines, you'll see supply routes, you'll see the real borders that matter. Because what you're watching on the news isn't ancient religious hatred, it's a corporate acquisition. And the price? Well, you're seeing it on your screen every night. Let me show you what they're actually fighting for. The mathematics are simple. Gaza Marine Field. Estimated reserves between 1 and 1.4 trillion cubic feet. At current European natural gas prices, we're looking at a theoretical asset value approaching $500 billion over its operational lifetime. That's not activist math. That's British Geological Survey data. That's industry assessment. Now here's where it gets interesting. In 1999, before the gas was even confirmed, the Palestinian Authority signed a 25-year development agreement with British Gas. Standard deal. BG Group would develop it, Palestinians get royalties, everyone's happy. The contract was real, the reserves were real, the infrastructure plans were drawn up, then nothing happened. British Gas cited security concerns. Development stalled, the agreement expired. New agreements were proposed, those stalled too. Decades pass, the gas stays in the ground. Meanwhile, 12 kilometers to the north, Israel discovers Tamar Field in 2009, 400 billion cubic meters. Then in 2010, Leviathan Field, 620 billion cubic meters. Combined estimated value, somewhere north of $90 billion. And suddenly, Israel becomes an energy exporter. Stop for a second. Think about the board meeting. You're an energy executive. You've got two fields. One is controlled by a stable government with export infrastructure and European buyers lined up. The other is controlled by a territory under blockade, classified as hostile, with zero infrastructure and maximum political risk. Which one are you developing? Which one gets the investment? This isn't about religion. This is portfolio management. Here's the mechanism they don't explain on cable news. Energy independence equals political leverage. If Gaza develops that field, Palestinian Authority generates independent revenue, billions in royalties, enough to build infrastructure, enough to reduce dependence on Israeli utilities, enough to change the power dynamic permanently. The policy position from Jerusalem has been consistent for 2 decades. No gas revenue can flow to Hamas. Sounds reasonable until you realize Hamas has controlled Gaza since 2007, which means the field can't be developed while Hamas exists, which means the field can't be developed while Gaza exists in its current form. They call it security policy. The balance sheet calls it market consolidation. Let me give you the historical pattern so you understand this isn't new. Belgian Congo, 1880s. King Leopold needs rubber for the Industrial Revolution. There are people living on top of the rubber trees. So what happens? The local population becomes a logistical obstacle. 10 million dead later, the rubber flows to Europe. British India, 1930s. Salt. The Crown holds the salt monopoly. Indians can't even collect salt from their own seawater without paying the tax. Gandhi marches to the sea to make salt illegally. Why? Because controlling basic resources means controlling the population. The resource changes, the mechanism doesn't. What was rubber then is natural gas now. What was salt then is energy now. You find a valuable resource under populated land, the population becomes the variable to solve for. Now let's talk about what you're seeing in the news through this lens. Since October 2023, over 60% of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed. That's United Nations damage assessment data. Over 2 million people displaced from a territory of 365 square kilometers. The most intensive bombing campaign per square kilometer in modern history. You're told this is about eliminating Hamas, about tunnels, about security, and maybe that's part of it. But look at what else happens when you clear a territory of its population and infrastructure. You clear title complications, you eliminate competing claims, you create what's called in development economics a blank slate scenario. When reconstruction happens, and it will happen, someone has to own that contract. Someone has to hold the development rights. Someone has to build on that land and extract from that water. Remember, the gas is still there. The reserves didn't go anywhere. They're just waiting for someone with the capital and the clearance to extract them. Now add another layer. The Ben Gurion Canal proposal? You've probably never heard of it, because it's not in mainstream coverage. It's a proposed alternative to the Suez Canal. The route? Straight through Israeli territory from Eilat to the Mediterranean. The problem? The most efficient route goes right along or through Gaza's territory. Suez Canal generates $6 billion annually for Egypt. If you're Israel, you want that revenue stream. But you can't build a competing canal through hostile territory. You need control, you need clearance, you need what the development documents call uncontested sovereignty. So let's add up the assets in play. $500 billion in gas reserves offshore, $6 billion annually in potential canal revenue, strategic control of Eastern Mediterranean energy exports to Europe, and that's before we price in the land value of Gaza's Mediterranean coastline, which in peacetime would be prime real estate. The news tells you this is about religion. The financial models tell you this is about asset acquisition. I want you to understand something. When a Gazan family's house gets destroyed, the news reports it as a tragedy, and it is. But in the boardrooms, in the development banks, in the energy ministry conference rooms, that's not how it appears on the spreadsheet. On the spreadsheet, that's a cleared site. That's reduced claim complexity. That's a step closer to development viability. They're not fighting over history. They're fighting over futures contracts. Here's what happens next, and you can track this in real time. When the bombing stops, watch who gets the reconstruction contracts. Watch which energy companies get exploration rights. Watch which development banks fund the rebuilding. Watch which firms get the coastal development deals. You'll see names you recognize. Chevron, Shell, BP, the same players who are currently developing Leviathan and Tamar, the same institutions that financed European energy infrastructure, the same development banks that rebuilt Iraq. They're already positioning. The contracts are already being drafted. They're just waiting for the variable to be solved. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you what to think about this. I'm not going to do that. I'm just showing you the money trail. You decide what it means. But understand this. What you're watching on television isn't ideology at war. What you're watching is a 40-year energy play reaching its endgame. Gaza sits on top of resources worth more than the GDP of most countries. Those resources need extraction. That extraction needs stability. That stability needs control. The formula is old. Belgian Congo learned it with rubber. The British taught it with salt and opium. The Americans perfected it with oil in the Middle East. Find the resource, secure the territory, extract the value. The people living there, their externalities, line items, demographic obstacles to be managed. You thought you were watching a religious conflict. You were watching a corporate merger, hostile acquisition, forced buyout. The terminology changes, but the mechanism is identical. When this is over, someone will control that gas field, someone will build that canal, someone will develop that coastline. It won't be the people who lived there. It never is. Check the history. Check who controlled Congo's minerals after Leopold. Check who controlled India's resources after the Crown. Check who controlled Iraq's oil after 2003. The pattern holds. So next time you see footage of buildings falling in Gaza, I want you to ask a different question. Don't ask why they're doing this. Ask who benefits when it's done. Don't ask about the tactical objective. Ask about the strategic asset. Don't follow the missiles. Follow the money. Because somewhere in an office you'll never see, someone is looking at that same footage and updating a different kind of calculation. Reduced infrastructure means reduced resistance. Displaced population means simplified permitting. Cleared territory means development opportunity. The news calls it war. The spreadsheet calls it land acquisition costs. $500 billion in natural gas sits under Palestinian water. The only thing between that gas and the global market is the people living above it. You do the math on how that problem gets solved. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The resource changes, the technology changes, the players change, but the mechanism? The mechanism is ancient. It's the same play they've been running since humans figured out that stuff in the ground is worth more than the people on top of it. I'm not here to tell you who's right or wrong. I'm here to show you what they're actually fighting over. And it's not religion. It's not land. It's not even really about security. It's about $500 billion of methane sitting in a geological formation 36 kilometers off the coast. Everything else is narrative management. You can believe the story they tell on the news, or you can look at the balance sheet. Your choice. But don't pretend they're telling you the same story. One is about ideology and ancient hatred. The other is about quarterly projections and resource allocation. Guess which one determines what actually happens. The bombs will stop eventually. They always do. And when the smoke clears, when the cameras move on to the next crisis, when your timeline fills up with something else, the real work begins. The contracts get signed. The drilling rights get transferred. The development begins. And 20 years from now, when European homes are heated with gas from the Eastern Mediterranean, nobody will remember how it got there. Nobody will ask whose water it came from. Nobody will trace the chain of title back to September 2000 when British Gas turned that valve and discovered what was really worth fighting for. The history books will call it a conflict. The financial statements will call it an acquisition. And somewhere in the gap between those two words is the truth nobody wants you to see. That's the video. Now you know where to look. I just showed you the map. The borders aren't where you think they are. They never were. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you want to see more deep dives into what's really happening behind the headlines. The algorithm won't show you this kind of analysis unless you tell it to. See you in the next one.